On my 18th birthday, Natalia and Gary handed me a trash bag and locked the door, telling me to sink or swim. 11 years later, they returned, demanding I give my estate to my bankrupt brother, Kyle. They didn't know I'd been preparing for this day since I left. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Inherited Revenge. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. I was lying on the sofa, a heavy knitted blanket pulled up to my chin, shivering despite the fire crackling in the hearth. The fever had broken hours ago, but the pneumonia had left me feeling hollowed out, as if my bones had been replaced with fragile glass. My landscaping firm had just finished the massive Holloway Estate project, 3 months of mud, sweat, and logistical nightmares, and my body had chosen the moment the final invoice was sent to completely shut down. I reached for the mug of tea on the coffee table, my hand trembling slightly. I was 29 years old, successful by any metric, yet in that moment, I felt small and defenseless. I just wanted to sleep for a week. The doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite chime, it was a persistent, demanding lean on the button. Buzz, buzz, bzzzzzzzzzt. I groaned, pushing myself upright. I wasn't expecting anyone. My assistant, Sarah, knew strictly to leave me alone, and I ordered all my groceries online. I shuffled to the door, wrapping my robe tighter around myself, my chest aching with every breath. I checked the security monitor. My blood ran cold. The fever hadn't returned, but a different kind of heat flashed through me, pure, unadulterated panic followed instantly by a wave of nausea. Standing on my porch, looking distorted through the fisheye lens, were 3 people I hadn't seen in 11 years. Natalia, Gary, and Kyle. My mother, my father, and my brother. They looked older. Natalia's hair was dyed a harsh, chemically bright blonde that didn't suit her skin tone, and Gary had gained significant weight, his jowls hanging heavy over a stiff collar. Kyle looked like a ghost. He was 26 now, but he stood with the slumped posture of a scolded teenager, staring at his phone, refusing to look at the door. I shouldn't have opened it. I should have called the police. I should have gone back to the couch and pretended I wasn't home. But the conditioning of a childhood spent seeking their approval is a powerful, insidious thing. Before my brain could scream stop, my hand had unlocked the deadbolt. The door swung open. The cool autumn air rushed in, chilling my sweat-dampened skin. "Willow," Natalia said. "No hello. No how are you. Just my name, spoken with the same tone one uses to address a servant who is late with dinner." She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my pale face and the expensive silk of my robe. "You look terrible." "I have pneumonia," I managed to rasp out, my voice weak. "What are you doing here?" Gary stepped forward, forcing me to take a step back into the foyer. He didn't ask to come in, he just occupied the space, his physical presence as dominating and suffocating as I remembered. "We need to talk, family business." "I don't have family business," I said, trying to summon the authority I used with contractors and clients. "I haven't been your family since the day I turned 18. "Don't be dramatic, Willow," Natalia snapped, brushing past me and walking into my living room, my sanctuary. She began scanning the space, her eyes calculating the value of the art on the walls, the custom furniture, the high vaulted ceilings. "We heard you were doing well. Landscape architecture. Sounds like glorified gardening to me, but clearly it pays." Kyle shuffled in last, finally looking up. His eyes were rimmed with red, and he looked terrified. He wouldn't meet my gaze. "Sit down," Gary commanded, not a request. He pointed to the armchair opposite the sofa. I remained standing, leaning against the doorframe for support. "Get out of my house." Natalia ignored me. She picked up a crystal vase from the mantel, inspecting the bottom for a brand name. "We're not going anywhere. We have a crisis, and since you're the only one sitting on a pile of money while your brother suffers, we've decided on a solution." "A solution?" I asked, my head spinning. Gary turned to me, his face set in a grim line. Kyle is in trouble, real trouble. He's going to lose everything. He needs a fresh start. He needs stability. And, Natalia said, placing the vase down with a sharp clack. You have this enormous house, far too big for a single woman with no children. It's practically obscene. We've decided that you're going to transfer the deed to T. He guessed cottage and the main house's equity to Kyle. It will give him the assets he needs to settle his debts and a place to live while he gets back on his feet. I stared at them. The room seemed to tilt. You want me to give him my house? Not give, Gary corrected, as if that made it better. Transfer ownership. He needs assets in his name to avoid complications. You can move into the guest cottage for now, or perhaps find an apartment in the city. You can afford it. He's your brother, Natalia added, her voice dropping to that sickly, sweet tone she used when she wanted to manipulate the narrative. And family comes first. You've had your fun playing businesswoman, but now it's time to do your duty. The room went silent. The crackling of the fire sounded like gunshots. I looked at Kyle, who was now studying the rug, shame radiating off him in waves. Then I looked at the parents who had thrown me away like garbage the moment legal obligation ended. The betrayal of their return wasn't that they wanted money. It was that they truly believed they still owned me. It was worse than the diagnosis, worse than the fever. It was a cancer I thought I had cut out, returning to claim the rest of the body. My legs finally gave out. I didn't faint, but I sank onto the ottoman near the door, my physical weakness making it impossible to hold the defensive posture any longer. You're joking, I whispered. A coughing fit overtook me, racking my frame until my ribs felt like they were splintering. Nobody moved to help. Natalia watched with a look of mild distaste, as if my illness were a breach of etiquette. Gary checked his watch. We aren't joking, Willow, Gary said, once I had regained my breath. We've already spoken to a lawyer about how to structure the transfer so it minimizes the gift tax for Kyle. We have the paperwork in the car. You brought paperwork? I asked, incredulous. Efficiency has always been our motto, Natalia said, smoothing her skirt. She walked over to the large bay window that overlooked the 3 acres of manicured gardens I had designed and planted with my own hands. This view is nice. Kyle, you could set up your gaming studio in the sunroom. The light is perfect. Kyle mumbled something that sounded like, I don't know, Mom. Hush, Kyle, she snapped, not looking at him. We are fixing this for you. Stop being ungrateful. I looked at them, really looked at them. They hadn't changed. Not one bit. They were still the grand architects of their own reality, moving people around like chess pieces. They saw my success not as an achievement to be proud of, but as a resource to be harvested. They didn't see me. They saw an ATM with a pulse. I haven't seen you in 11 years, I said, my voice gaining a little more steel as the shock began to curdle into anger. You didn't come to my college graduation. You didn't call when I was hospitalized after the car accident 3 years ago. I know Aunt Marge told you. You didn't send a card. Nothing. And you walk in here while I'm sick and tell me to move out of my own house. We're here now, Gary said, dismissing the past decade with a wave of his thick hand. Stop living in the past. That's your problem, Willow. You always held grudges. We did what we had to do to make you independent. And look, it worked. You're rich. You should be thanking us for the push. The push, I laughed, a dry, rasping sound. You threw me out at midnight. And you survived, Natalia said coldly. But Kyle is sensitive. He needs support. He's not like you. He's an artist, a creator. The world is too harsh for him. He's 26, Mother. He's not a child. He has potential, Gary bellowed, his face flushing red. It was the same tone he used to use right before the belt came out. And he is in a crisis. Do you have no heart? Your own brother is facing ruin, and you're sitting here hoarding wealth like a dragon. It's disgusting. What kind of ruin? I asked, looking directly at Kyle. What did you do, Kyle? Kyle opened his mouth, but Natalia cut in instantly. It doesn't matter. bad investments. The economy is terrible. The point is, he has debts, and he needs assets to secure a loan to pay them off, or, well, let's just say the people he owes aren't banks. So you want me to give him my house so he can leverage it against a loan shark? I clarified. It's a temporary measure, Natalia insisted, once his crypto investments bounce back. Crypto, I muttered, of course. He just needs the deed, Gary said, stepping closer to me, using his size to intimidate. You sign it over. He gets the loan. He pays the debts. He lives here to save on rent. You have plenty of money. You can buy another place. Or rent. It's just a house, Willow. People are more important than things. People are more important than things. The irony was so thick I could taste it like bile. These were the people who sold my childhood dog Bikaus. He shed too much on the new carpet. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I was still the scared little girl who desperately wanted mommy and daddy to love her. They thought that by appealing to family duty, they could override the logic of a woman who had built a business from scratch in a male-dominated industry. They saw the sick girl in the robe. They didn't see the wolf underneath. I need time, I lied. I'm sick, I can't think straight. We don't have time, Gary growled. The deadline is tomorrow. Then you should have come sooner, I said, meeting his eyes. I'm not signing anything today. Come back tomorrow at noon. I'll see what I can do. Natalia and Gary exchanged a look of victory. They thought they had won. They thought I was folding. Fine, Natalia sniffed. Noon tomorrow, and Willow, have the guest cottage cleaned. I noticed dust on the blinds. They turned and marched out, Kyle trailing behind them like a beaten puppy. He paused at the door, looking back at me for a split second. In his eyes, I saw apology, but I also saw cowardice. He wouldn't stop them. He never did. I locked the door behind them and leaned my forehead against the cool wood. My breathing was ragged, my fever threatening to spike again from the stress. They were coming back tomorrow to take everything I had built. They thought they held all the cards, the parental authority, the guilt, the desperation. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I wasn't just a landscape architect. I was a survivor of the Gary and Natalia school of parenting. And unlike Kyle, I had learned my lessons well. I pushed myself off the door and walked not to my bed, but to my study. I had a phone call to make and a safe to open. To understand why the sight of them made me physically ill, you have to understand the night I turned 18. I had been an obsession for Natalia and Gary, or rather, my obedience was their obsession. I was a straight-A student, captain of the debate team, never drank, never partied. I did everything right because I was terrified of doing anything wrong. But there was a rule they had repeated since I was in kindergarten. When you turn 18, our legal obligation ends. You are an adult, you figure it out. I thought it was a motivational tactic, a way to encourage independence. I didn't think it was a literal eviction notice. My birthday falls in November. It was raining that year, a freezing, sleeting rain that turned the streets into rivers of slush. We had cake after dinner. I blew out the candles. I opened my one gift, a set of luggage. Happy birthday, Gary had said, checking his watch. It's 8:00 p.m. You have 4 hours to pack. I laughed. I thought it was a joke. Natalia didn't smile. We're serious, Willow. We've told you this for years. We aren't running a hotel. You're an adult now. We want our privacy back. We want to travel. We're done raising you. I spent the next 3 hours crying, begging, and pleading. I asked where I was supposed to go. I had $200 in savings. I had school the next day. Figure it out, Gary said, turning up the volume on the TV. At midnight, they physically escorted me to the door. I had one suitcase, the one they gave me, and a trash bag full of clothes. They took my house key. Don't come back until you can stand on your own 2 feet, Natalia said. We don't support parasites. They shut the door. I heard the deadbolt slide home. I slept under a bus shelter that night, clutching my bag, shivering so violently I bit through my tongue. The next few years were a blur of misery. I lived in a youth shelter for 6 months. I dropped out of high school 2 months before graduation because I couldn't get there and work the 2 jobs I needed to survive. I cleaned toilets, I waited tables, I worked construction. I finished my GED at night. I clawed my way into community college, then transferred to a state university on a full scholarship for landscape architecture. I worked 80-hour weeks. I ate ramen. I never took a vacation. I saved every penny. I started my business out of the back of a beat-up van, mowing lawns until I could afford to design them. I built my life brick by brick, fueled by a singular, burning rage. I wanted to be so successful that I would never, ever have to ask them for a damn thing. And I did it. I bought the land. I designed the house. I built a sanctuary where no one could ever kick me out again. Meanwhile, there was Kyle. Kyle was 3 years younger. When he turned 18, I waited for him to show up at my apartment door, ready to take him in. He never came. I found out later that the rule didn't apply to him. Kyle was sensitive. Kyle needed time. Kyle stayed in his room, playing video games, while Gary and Natalia paid for his car, his college, which he dropped out of, his coding boot camps, which he quit, and his boo. Sinus ventures, which were scams. They enabled him into a state of permanent adolescence. They crippled him with comfort. Now, looking at the security footage of them driving away in Gary's least luxury SUV, the dynamic was crystal clear. Natalia was the puppet master, a woman so obsessed with appearances that she would cannibalize her own children to maintain her lifestyle. She didn't want Kyle to be homeless because it would look bad for her. Gary was the enforcer, a bully who mistook cruelty for strength. He had never respected me because I was a girl, and he didn't respect Kyle because Kyle was weak, a weakness Gary himself had cultivated. And the antagonist wasn't just them as individuals, it was their shared delusion. They truly believed that my success was community property, available to be redistributed to the golden child whenever he stumbled. They viewed my hard work as luck and their neglect as good parenting. They saw my house and saw a solution to their problem. They didn't see the years of therapy. They didn't see the nights I woke up screaming, dreaming of the cold rain on my 18th birthday. They didn't see the iron will that had formed in the vacuum of their love. I sat at my desk, the adrenaline finally overriding the pneumonia. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a fireproof lockbox. Inside was a single, yellowing piece of paper. It was a contract. On the night they kicked me out, Gary had made me sign a document. He thought it was a clever way to ensure I never came back claiming squatters' rights or demanding financial support for college. He had drafted it himself, using legal jargon he barely understood, intended to sever all financial ties between us forever. I, Willow Vance, upon reaching the age of majority, hereby acknowledge that I am solely responsible for my own financial well-being and waive any and all future claims to support, inheritance, or assets from Gary and Natalia Vance. Furthermore, Gary and Natalia Vance are hereby absolved of any liability regarding Willow Vance's housing, debts, or medical care, effective immediately. He had made me sign it while I was crying, thinking it was just another humiliation. But he had forgotten the second page. The page I had added, in my tearful, shaking handwriting, which I had begged them to sign as a condition of me leaving quietly without screaming the neighborhood down. A page they signed without reading, laughing at my desperation to have a memento. I smoothed out the paper. "Sarah," I whispered into my phone, dialing my assistant despite the late hour. "I need you to call Mr. Henderson, my lawyer, tell him it's an emergency, and tell him to bring the Vance Trust file." They wanted a war. They were about to find out that the landscape architect knew exactly how to dig a grave. The next morning, the sun streamed through the heavy velvet curtains of my study, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I hadn't slept. The pneumonia was a dull ache in my chest, a constant reminder of my vulnerability, but my mind was razor sharp. At 8:00 a.m. sharp, Arthur Henderson arrived. Arthur was 70 years old, wore three-piece suits even on Saturdays, and had been my lawyer since I incorporated my landscaping firm. He was the grandfather I never had and the legal shark I desperately needed. He sat across from me at my mahogany desk, peering at the yellow paper through his wire-rimmed spectacles. He read it once, then twice. A slow, dry smile spread across his face. "They actually signed this?" Arthur asked, tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail. "Gary drafted the first page," I said, sipping hot water with lemon. "He wanted to make sure I couldn't come back and ask for tuition money. I wrote the second page on a notepad and made them sign it before I handed over my house key." "And the second page," Arthur read aloud, his voice gravelly, "states that Willow Vance accepts full autonomy and release from the family unit, and in turn, Gary and Natalia Vance release all claims to future earnings, assets, or decisions made by Willow Vance, recognizing her as a stranger in matters of estate and finance." He chuckled darkly. "It's crude. It's not exactly a standard legal filing. But combined with the witnesses, your aunt signed as a witness." "She did. She was crying in the kitchen." "It establishes intent," Arthur said, leaning back. "They legally disowned you to save a buck. Now that you're the cash cow, they want to tear up the contract. Typical." "Can they force me to sign the house over?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Force? No. Coerce? Yes," Arthur said, his expression hardening. "But they've overlooked the fundamental structure of your assets. They see a big house and assume you own it like they own their leased SUV. They don't understand how wealth is actually protected." He opened the thick file folder he had brought with him. The Willow Vance IREV. "Ockable Trust. You don't own this house, Willow. The trust does. You are merely the beneficiary and the trustee. To transfer the deed, you'd have to dissolve the trust, which requires proving to a court that it's in the beneficiary's best interest. Giving away a $2 million asset to a bankrupt sibling to pay off crypto debts is the opposite of your best interest. A judge would laugh them out of the room." "So I'm safe," I said, feeling a knot loosen in my stomach. "Legally, yes, but these people," Arthur gestured to the door, "they aren't operating on logic. They're operating on entitlement and desperation. That's what worries me. People don't show up after 11 years demanding a house for bad investments. That smells wrong." "You think they're lying." "I think bad investments is a euphemism," Arthur said. "I took the liberty of running a preliminary background check on your brother this morning while I was having my coffee. His credit score is abysmal, yes, but there are no liens against him yet, no lawsuits filed. If he was just in debt to a bank, he'd declare bankruptcy. He wouldn't need your house immediately. This urgency suggests the debt isn't traditional." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with my fever. "Loan sharks." "Or worse," Arthur said. "I know a private investigator, former forensic accountant, name's Miller. I want him to dig into Kyle's life. If we're going to tell them no at noon, we need to know exactly what we're saying no to. Because if they're desperate enough to show up here, they're desperate enough to do something stupid." "Hire him," I said without hesitation. "I want to know everything. Every transaction, every text message, every secret." "Consider it done," Arthur said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "Now, about this noon meeting, do you want me here?" I shook my head. "No, if you're here, they'll clam up. They'll know I'm lawyering up. I need them to think I'm considering it. I need them to talk. I need them to admit what's really going on." "Be careful, Willow," Arthur warned, his eyes soft for a moment. "They know how to push your buttons. They installed them." "They installed the buttons," I agreed, standing up and smoothing my silk robe. "But I rewired the machine." At 11:55 a.m., I was sitting in the living room. I had dressed in a sharp black business suit, despite the fact that I was staying home. I wore my hair pulled back in a severe bun. I applied makeup to hide the pallor of my sickness. I wasn't the sick daughter anymore. I was the CEO of my own life. At 12:00 p.m. exactly, the doorbell rang. They walked in with an air of triumphant expectation. Natalia was wearing a new scarf, Hermes, likely fake. Gary was carrying a leather folder. Kyle was trailing behind, looking even more nauseous than I felt. But they weren't alone. Trailing behind Kyle was a short, nervous-looking woman holding a notary stamp bag. "Who is this?" I asked, remaining seated. "This is Mrs. Gable," Natalia said breezily, gesturing for the woman to sit at the dining table. "She's a notary. We thought we'd save you the trip to the bank. Gary has the quitclaim deed ready. All you have to do is sign, she stamps, and we can file it today. Then we can start moving Kyle's things in this weekend." The audacity was breathtaking. They had brought a notary to my house to facilitate my own dispossession. "You're very efficient," I said, my voice dry. "We told you family comes first," Gary said, slamming the leather folder onto the coffee table. He pulled out a document. "Sign here, here, and here. It transfers the title to Kyle Vance purely as a gift. No tax implications for you, really, just a loss." I looked at the document. It was a standard LegalZoom printout. It was pathetic. "I have a question before I sign," I said, leaning back and crossing my legs. Gary sighed, an exaggerated, impatient sound. "What now, Willow? Don't make this difficult." "Why Kyle?" I asked, looking directly at my brother. "Why can't you just declare bankruptcy, Kyle? If it's just bad investments, wipe the slate clean. Why do you need my house?" Kyle flinched. He opened his mouth, his eyes darting to Gary. "Because bankruptcy ruins your credit for 7 years?" Natalia interjected loudly. "He's young, he has a future. We can't let a few mistakes ruin his reputation. We are Vances. We don't declare bankruptcy." "You don't declare bankruptcy," I repeated, "but you do extort your estranged daughter." "It's not extortion," Gary shouted, his face reddening. "It's restitution. We raised you, we fed you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. You owe us." "I owe you," I stood up, grabbing the yellow paper from the side table. "According to this, I don't owe you a thing." I held it up. Gary squinted at it, confusion clouding his angry features. "What is that?" "It's the contract you made me sign the night you kicked me out," I said, my voice steady but cold as Ike. Remember, Willow Vance is solely responsible for her own financial well-being." And the second page, "Gary and Natalia Vance release all claims to future assets." Gary's face went pale. Natalia gasped, "You kept that?" "I framed it," I lied. "It was the best gift you ever gave me, freedom." That's not legally binding," Gary stammered, though he looked unsure. "It was just a house rule list." "It's a signed contract with a witness," I corrected, "but that's not the real problem for you." I dropped the yellow paper back onto the table and picked up the quitclaim deed they had brought. I ripped it in half. The sound of the tearing paper was loud in the silent room. Mrs. Gable, the notary, looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. "You can't do that," Natalia shrieked. "I just did," I said. "And here is the reality check you desperately need. Even if I wanted to help you, which I couldn't, I don't own this house." "What?" Kyle spoke for the first time, his voice trembling. "But, you said." "The Willow Vance Irrevocable Trust owns this house," I declared, channeling Arthur Henderson. "I put this property and all my major assets into a trust 5 years ago. I am the beneficiary, but I cannot alienate the assets. I cannot give them away, sell them, or transfer them to satisfy the debts of a third party. Especially not a third party with a history of financial irresponsibility." "Break the trust," Gary demanded, stepping forward, his hands balled into fists. "You set it up, you can break it." "It's irrevocable, Gary. Look it up," I snapped. "It means no. It means the law protects me from people like you. It means this house will never, ever belong to Kyle." The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. Gary looked like he was about to stroke out. Natalia looked like she had swallowed a lemon. Then Natalia changed tactics. The anger vanished, replaced by a terrifying, weeping desperation. She threw herself onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. "You're killing him," she wailed. You're killing your brother. If he doesn't come up with $500,000 by Friday, they're going to. Oh God. I froze. Who is they, mother? She looked up, her mascara running. It's not crypto, Willow. It's the gambling he owes people. Bad people. Eastern European syndicate people. They said if he doesn't pay, they'll take it out in trade. I looked at Kyle. He was weeping silently, tears streaming down his face. Is this true? I asked him. He nodded. I messed up, Willow. I messed up bad. I started playing online poker, and then I borrowed to chase the losses, and then they know where I live. They know where Mom and Dad live. For a second, just a split second, I felt a pang of pity. Not for my parents, but for the terrified boy who had never been taught how to be a man. But then Gary spoke. So you see, Gary sneered, sensing my hesitation. You have to do it. The trust doesn't matter. Find a loophole. Or are you going to let your brother get his legs broken? Are you that cold? We need the money, Willow, and you're the only one who has it. You lied to me, I said softly. You came here with a lie about bad investments and family support. You tried to trick me into funding a gambling debt. We were protecting you, Natalia sobbed. We didn't want you to worry. No, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourselves. You didn't want the scandal. You didn't want the neighbors to know your golden child is a degenerate gambler involved with the mob. Get out, I whispered. Willow, Kyle started. Get out, I screamed, my voice cracking, the pneumonia seizing my lungs. Get out of my house. Take your notary and your lies and get out. Gary glared at me with pure hatred. This isn't over. If anything happens to him, it's on your head. You hear me? You're responsible. They gathered their things and fled, leaving me coughing uncontrollably in the foyer, the torn pieces of the deed scattered on the floor like confetti. The next 48 hours were a nightmare of harassment. My phone didn't stop ringing. Texts from unknown numbers. Voicemails from Natalia ranging from begging, please, he's your flesh and blood, to vicious, I wish I had never given birth to you. They started attacking my business. 1-star reviews started popping up on my Google page and Yelp. Owner is heartless, rude and unprofessional, cheated me out of money. They were obviously fake, written by Natalia and her bridge club friends, but they damaged the reputation I had spent a decade building. I sat in my office, watching the reviews roll in, feeling helpless. But then, my phone buzzed with a call from Arthur Henderson. The pie report is in, Arthur said. And Willow, you might want to sit down. Your mother's story about the Eastern European syndicate. Yeah. It's a lie. I blinked. What? Kyle doesn't owe money to the mob, Arthur explained. Mr. Miller dug into the financials. Kyle was working as a treasurer for a local charity, the Bayside Youth Initiative. He embezzled nearly $600,000 over 2 years to fund a day trading addiction. Not poker, day trading. He lost it all. Oh my God. The audit is scheduled for next Monday, Arthur continued. That's the deadline. That's why they need the money by Friday. They aren't trying to save his legs from breakers. They are trying to replace the money in the charity's account before the auditors arrive, so he doesn't go to federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement. I felt the room spin. They aren't scared of violence, they're scared of prison. Correct, and the scandal, Arthur added. Your father is on the board of that charity. If this comes out, Gary goes down for negligence, and the family name is mud. They are trying to use your house to launder the theft. I hung up the phone, a cold fury settling over me. It was so much worse than I thought. They weren't just asking for money, they were asking me to be an accessory to a felony. They were trying to drag me into their criminal mess to save their social standing. I printed the report Arthur had emailed me. That evening I was home, the lights off, watching the rain streak against the glass. The doorbell rang again. I checked the camera, it was just Kyle. Alone. He was soaked to the bone, standing in the rain, looking like a drowned rat. I opened the door. I have nowhere to go, he whispered, shivering. Mom and Dad kicked me out. What? I asked, confused. Why? Because I couldn't get you to sign, he said, his voice breaking. They said I'm useless. They said if I can't fix this, I can't stay there because they don't want the police knocking on their door when the audit happens. He walked in, dripping onto my hardwood floors. He collapsed onto the rug, sobbing. I'm so sorry, Willow. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to steal it. I thought I could make it back. I thought I could double it and put it back and no one would know. You stole from a charity, Kyle, I said, looking down at him. And Dad knew. Dad helped me get the access codes, Kyle admitted between sobs. He didn't know I was taking it until it was gone. Now he's just trying to cover his own ass. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. Please, Willow, I don't want to go to jail. I'm scared. I'll do anything. I'll work for you. I'll be your gardener. Just help me. I looked at my brother, the brother who never called, the brother who watched them kick me out and did nothing. He was pathetic, yes, but he was also a victim of two monsters who had raised him to believe consequences were for other people. But I couldn't save him, not in the way he wanted. Giving him the money would only continue the cycle. It would make me an accomplice. I can't give you the money, Kyle, I said gently. He wailed, curling into a ball. But, I said, my voice hardening, I can help you, but you have to do exactly what I say, and it involves going against Mom and Dad, completely. He stopped crying and looked up. What? We are going to stop them, I said. They want a solution. I'm going to give them one. But first, we need to go to the police. The police, he recoiled. No, I can't. You can turn yourself in, I said firmly. You cooperate. You tell them Dad gave you the codes. You make a deal. It's your only chance at a future that isn't looking over your shoulder. And it's the only way to stop Mom and Dad from controlling you forever. They'll kill me, he whispered. No, I said, reaching down and helping him stand up. They won't, because tomorrow is the charity's annual gala, the Bayside Ball. Dad is giving the keynote speech, isn't he? Kyle nodded. Good, I said, a plan forming in my mind, a plan so sharp and final it frightened even me. Then that's where we're going to finish this. Go shower. You're staying here tonight. Tomorrow, we go to war. The Bayside Charity Gala was held in the ballroom of the Grand Hotel, a venue that smelled of stale perfume, expensive lilies, and old money. It was the kind of place where people smiled with their teeth while their eyes calculated your net worth. I parked my modest sedan between a Bentley and a Porsche. Beside me, Kyle was shaking so hard his seatbelt was vibrating against his chest. He was wearing a suit I had bought him that morning, one that actually fit, replacing the slouchy, oversized clothes he usually hid in. I can't do this, he whispered, staring at the revolving doors. They're all in there, the board members, the donors, Mom and Dad. You have two choices, Kyle, I said, unbuckling my seatbelt and turning to face him. You can walk in there with me, face the music, and take the plea deal Arthur arranged. Or you can run, let Dad pin the entire embezzlement on you while he lays the grieving father, and spend the next 10 years in federal prison. It's up to you. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Dad will kill me. Dad is about to lose his teeth, I said, my voice cold. He just doesn't know it yet. Are you ready to stop being their puppet? Kyle took a deep, shuddering breath. I'm ready. We walked in. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and sequins. A string quartet was butchering Mozart in the corner. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and caviar blinnies. It was the perfect ecosystem for Gary and Natalia Vance, a world built entirely on surface-level appearances. We spotted them immediately. They were holding court near the ice sculpture, a centerpiece carved into the shape of a lighthouse. Gary was wearing a tuxedo that strained at the buttons, a glass of scotch in his hand, laughing loudly at something a local judge was saying. Natalia was draped in a silver gown that cost more than my first car, clutching the arm of the mayor's wife. They looked invincible. They looked like the pillars of the community. Then Natalia saw us. Her smile faltered, then vanished. She grabbed Gary's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. Gary turned, his face going from jovial to purple in a split second. He said something to the judge, excused himself, and began marching toward us, Natalia trailing in his wake like a shark's pilot fish. They intercepted us near the buffet, away from the main crowd, but still in plain view. "What the hell are you doing here?" Gary hissed, his voice a low rumble of menace. He looked at Kyle, then at me. "I told you to fix this, Willow. Instead, you bring him here to embarrass us." "We aren't here to embarrass you, Dad," I said, keeping my voice level. "We're here to close the account." "Did you sign the papers?" Natalia demanded, her eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching. "Do you have the money? The auditors are coming on Monday, Willow. Monday." "There is no money," Kyle said. His voice was quiet, barely a whisper. "Speak up, boy," Gary snapped. Kyle straightened his spine. For the first time in his life, he looked our father in the eye. "I said, there is no money, I lost it all, and Willow isn't giving you her house to cover it up." Gary's face contorted. "You ungrateful little," he raised a hand, a reflex from a lifetime of bullying, but I stepped between them. "Don't," I warned, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the party. "You aren't in your kitchen anymore, Gary. You're in public, and you're about to be in a lot more trouble than a scene at a party." "You think you're so smart," Natalia sneered, her silver dress shimmering as she trembled with rage. "You think you can just waltz in here and dictate terms? We are your parents. We made you." "You made me leave," I corrected. "And then you made Kyle into a criminal to fund your lifestyle." "We didn't make him steal," Gary shouted, losing control of his volume. A few heads turned. "He did that on his own. He's a screw-up just like you were." "Is that what you're going to tell the police?" I asked calmly. "That Kyle acted alone, that he guessed your password for the charity's treasury account, the password you keep in your desk drawer." Gary froze. "How do you know about that?" "Because I told her," Kyle said. "I told her everything. I told her how you gave me the login when I said I needed a short-term loan for the crypto scheme last year. I told her how you've been skimming expenses from the fund for years to pay for the lease on the SUV and Mom's trips to Cabo." The color drained from Natalia's face. "Kyle, shut up. You're talking nonsense." "It's not nonsense," I said. "It's evidence. We went to the district attorney this morning. Kyle confessed to everything, the embezzlement, the wire fraud, and the collusion." Gary dropped his scotch glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound distinct and shocking over the string quartet. The chatter in the room stopped. People turned to stare. You went to the DA," Gary whispered, horror dawning on him. "You turned in your own brother." "I saved my brother," I said. "He's getting a reduced sentence for cooperation. He's going to pay his debt to society, not to you. But you—" I took a step closer, enjoying the way he shrank back. "You're the fiduciary, you're the board member, and you're the one who facilitated the theft to cover your own tracks." "You wouldn't," Natalia gasped, clutching her pearls. "This will ruin us, the scandal, the shame. Willow, please, family comes first." "You're right," I said, my voice echoing in the silent ballroom. "Family does come first. That's why I'm protecting the only family I have left, my brother, from the people who destroyed him." At that moment, the double doors at the entrance opened. It wasn't a dramatic SWAT team raid. It was quiet, professional, and devastating. 2 uniformed officers and a detective in a cheap suit walked by. And they scanned the room, spotting us immediately. Gary looked at the police, then at the exit, realizing there was nowhere to run. The illusion of his power, the fear he had instilled in us for decades, evaporated instantly. He wasn't a titan. He was just a thief in a rental tux. "Gary Vance," the detective asked, approaching our group. "This is a misunderstanding," Gary stammered, his hands shaking. "My son, he's confused. He has mental health issues." "Save it for the station," the detective said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "We have a warrant for your arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and embezzlement. And you, Mrs. Vance, we have a warrant for you as well." accessing funds knowingly. Me, Natalia shrieked as an officer moved to cuff her. I didn't do anything, I just spent what he gave me, I didn't know. That's not what the emails say, ma'am, the detective said dryly. As they were led away, handcuffed and humiliated, marching past the very people they had tried so hard to impress, the silence in the room was deafening. The mayor's wife watched with her mouth open. The judge shook his head. Kyle stood beside me, tears running down his face, but he wasn't looking at the floor anymore. He was watching them go. "I'm sorry," he whispered to me. "I know," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Now comes the hard part." One of the officers gestured to Kyle. "You too, son, you know the drill." Kyle nodded. He held out his hands. They cuffed him gently, knowing he had surrendered voluntarily. He looked at me one last time before they let him out. "Thank you," he mouthed. I stood alone in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the shattered glass of my father's scotch and the whispers of the town's elite. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a profound, heavy silence where the noise of their expectations used to be. I turned and walked out, leaving the Bayside Ball and my past behind me for good. 6 months later, the spring flowers were beginning to bloom in my garden. I was on my knees in the dirt, planting hydrangeas, the cool earth grounding me. It was a Saturday, and for the first time in years, I wasn't working. I was just being. The legal fallout had been swift and brutal. With Kyle's testimony and the forensic accounting records, the case against Gary and Natalia was open and shut. It turned out the charity embezzlement was just the tip of the iceberg. They had been living on credit and fraud for a decade, moving money between accounts, refinancing homes they didn't own, and leeching off anyone who would let them. Gary was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The judge, clearly unimpressed by his attempts to blame his children, gave him the maximum for his bracket. Natalia, ever the survivor, managed to plead down to 3 years of probation and community service by turning on Gary at the last minute, claiming she was a victim of his financial abuse. It saved her from prison, but it didn't save her social standing. She lost the house, the cars, and her friends. She moved to a small apartment 3 towns over and works as a receptionist at a dental clinic. She sends me letters sometimes, asking for money. I burn them unopened. And Kyle. Kyle was sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security facility, with credit for time served and cooperation. It was a slap on the wrist, legally speaking, but for him, it was a lifeline. He was away from the internet, away from gambling, and away from our parents. I visited him every Sunday. He looked different now. He had gained weight, healthy weight. He was reading books. He was taking classes. We talked about everything except our parents. We talked about landscaping, about books, about the future. For the first time in our lives, we were actually siblings. I stood up, wiping the dirt from my hands, and walked toward the patio where Arthur Henderson was sitting, sipping a glass of iced tea. "You look tired, Willow," Arthur observed, though his eyes twinkled. "It's a good tired," I said, sitting opposite him. "How did the sale go?" "Finalized this morning," Arthur said, sliding a document across the table. "The bank foreclosed on your parents' house. The proceeds went to restitution for the charity. There's nothing left over for them, obviously, but the chapter is closed." I nodded, looking out over the 3 acres of land that belonged to the Willow Vance Irrevocable Trust. My parents had tried to use family as a weapon. They thought that shared DNA was a license to steal, to abuse, and to control. They thought that because they gave me life, they own my life. They were wrong. Family isn't about whose blood runs in your veins. It's about who stands by you when the rain starts. It's about who respects your boundaries and celebrates your victories. I picked up the glass of lemonade I had poured for myself. "To family," I said, raising the glass to Arthur, the man who had protected me when my own father wouldn't. "To family," Arthur agreed, clinking his glass against mine. I took a sip, the tart sweetness filling my mouth. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. The air was fresh and clean. I thought about the 18-year-old girl shivering under the bus shelter with a trash bag of clothes. I wished I could go back and tell her that it was going to be okay, that the pain would forge her into iron, that the loneliness would teach her the value of true connection, and that one day she would build a castle that no wolf could ever blow down. I was an adult now, and I had finally figured it out.